Hello, and welcome to Making It, a podcast about making things with your bare hands, hosted by Jimmy Diresta, Bob Clagett, and myself, David Picciuto. And before we get this started, I just want to remind you guys that we would like to ask you to subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes, as it helps us get in front of more ears. And with that being said, let's talk about what we're working on. Bob, what you got going on?
I am finally working on a video for my arcade machine. So excited. So I started the arcade project it's been a year ago or something. And just did blog posts about the electronics, about getting the Raspberry Pi up and then getting the control board put together. And so that's all on my site, but people ask me about it all the time. And since I'm going to move into making the arcade cabinet, I figured it would make sense to make a video about the electronics part of it. So, it's not really new work for me, but I think it'll be new to a lot of people watching videos. And it's nice to work on something like that, take a break from, building something and just wire something up for me. So, yeah. What about you, Jimmy? What are you working on?
Well, this weekend, Taylor and I started a video and a build of a teepee. We're going to build a teepee on the property upstate.
Nice.
It's Taylor is spearheading the project. She's done tons and tons of research. And we have tons and tons of inspiration on Pinterest. And she had to talk me into it. I was a bit of a curmudgeon in the beginning, but now I'm totally into it. We went walking in the woods looking for 36-foot long pine trees. And at first it didn't seem like we had that many that long, but now that we really started digging into it, we have plenty. I got 40 acres, so there's tons and tons of young, skinny, long, tall trees. And we cut down about 10 of them this weekend. And we started to skin them, and we set up a little area out in the woods, and we picked a site. So that's going to be a long-term project. And we started videotaping the whole process, and it's cool. It's a lot of fun. It's fun because it goes sort of to our topic for this week, which is people that inspire us. And one of my big inspirations is Dick Pernicki, and so this whole project is really inspired by him as well. So, David?
Yes.
What are you working on?
What am I working on? Hey, guys. I was just going to let you go. I wasn't going to interrupt you.
I'm so sorry. I thought it ended on me.
No. I just finished up a video about how to make a beer mug on the lathe. I got a good response about that. And then
that was great.
This week, thank you. And then this week, I went to an antique store and I got an old alarm clock. You remember those alarm clocks with the numbers flip up? And
oh yeah. I have a computer graphic on my screen of that. It's a mimic of that.
Yes. And so I grabbed one of those, thinking, okay, I'm gonna tear it apart and I'm gonna rebuild the case for it. So I started. I was gonna start that this week, and it turns out it doesn't work, and I can't figure out why it doesn't work. So that project got put on the shelf until I can figure out what's wrong with it or get another one. So now I'm kind of scrambling and seeing what I can build and record in a day. So we'll see what that is.
Yeah.
So,
that honestly, instead of scrapping that project, it sounds like it just turned into two projects.
Fixing the clock.
Fix one and then rebuild it.
Yeah.
Is that you're talking about the clock where the numbers move down slowly and then come off with a little pin and flop down?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the case on this clock was actually pretty cool. I've been wanting to rebuild one of these clocks for a while now. And so if I feel there's a part of me that feels bad for tearing up what already looks cool, but I figured I can make it even cooler.
Right on.
So yeah, we got to fix it first. So that's what we're working on. Jimmy.
The topic for this week is people that inspire us. And as I was saying about the teepee, a big inspiration for me and many of the projects I've done this past year, when you see me hand sawing or using a hatchet or whatever it is, it's a big inspiration for me is Dick Pernicki, the guy who lived out in the woods in Alaska and did everything by hand with hand tools. And so this week's topic is, many people asked us over the last several weeks, who are the people that inspire us? And I have a lot of people that inspire me. And there's different categories of people that inspire me, people that inspire us on YouTube, people that inspire us in our artistic vision, and people that inspire us in our furniture building and our techniques. So, anybody want to take it?
Yeah, I'll take one. I've always been completely blown away by Walt Disney, and I know that may be a little obvious. I think he did a lot of good stuff, a lot of big stuff, a lot of famous stuff. But I think the thing that really inspires me about him is when you watch him talk about things. If you've ever seen video of him talking, when he's talking about the stuff that he envisions before it's created, it blows my mind. Like there's this video you can find it on YouTube. I'll try to find it and put a link in show notes, but it's about him talking about Epcot, his idea for what Epcot Center would be, probably, 20 years before it was built or something. And he had this whole grand idea for the city of the future. And it was going to kind of be an idea of what other cities would actually be like in the future. And when he talks about it, you can just tell he's like so forward thinking. And then I've heard some stuff about him, how he set up the Imagineering group within Disney, like the original 12 or whatever it was. Like these guys that basically were just, you have to figure out how to make dreams come true. That was their job, And so for somebody to be in a position to enable other people to do that job, that's pretty awesome. So he's always been kind of one of my tops.
It's funny you bring up Disney because there's a little story that I heard, and I don't know if we talked about this before, but Disney, apparently, if you were meeting him for the first time and you were going to potentially work for him, he would always sort of charade and say, "Hey, you got a little tool on you? I need to do something." And if you did not have a tool on you and you were not prepared with either a Swiss Army knife or something, you lost a notch in your interview.
Huh.
Yeah. So it was a little secret thing that he would do when he met people, was to find out if you were like prepared for anything. So that stuck with me. I heard that many years ago, and I don't know if it's true. Maybe we could do a fact check on that. But
yeah, see if we can dig that up.
Yeah, I always thought that was cool.
I'm going to lump two people together, and this type of inspiration is just how these two people live their lives. One is Sam Maloof, and the other is my grandfather. And I always say when I hit 80 some years old, those are the two people that I want to be. I still want to be doing stuff. I want to be an inspiration to people, and we'll link to this in the show notes. But there's a great hour-long documentary on YouTube on the life of Sam Maloof, and it was just a very in his later years, which he passed away, I believe, in 2011. And he just lived a slow life, but he enjoyed it. And he made furniture up until the day he died. And my grandfather, who's still with us, he's out in the shop. If it's warm enough, he's out in the shop making birdhouses and all kinds of toys for the great-grandchildren. And that's just where I want to be when I reach that age. I still want to be making stuff, and I still want to be a part of people's lives in some sort of way. So,
very cool. When we were talking about leading up to this particular episode, I started making a list, and I actually had to categorize different parts of my list, like YouTubers that inspire me and artists that inspire me. When I say artists, classical artists and fine artists and artists from the Renaissance, and then a couple of current people that inspire me. A lot of people say, who's my favorite maker? And I always think in terms of New York City. I don't know why, but the first person I always think of is Paul Cox. Are you guys familiar with Paul Cox?
The motorcycle guy?
Yeah, Paul Cox.
Yeah.
Lives in this. He lives in Brooklyn, but when I first came to the neighborhood, he was in this neighborhood on 6th Street. He had his spot there, and I first heard of him because my brother had a seat made by him for his Harley, and a friend of a friend said, "Oh, you got to go to Paul Cox," and he made this cowhide seat for my brother. But then, as I got to hear his name more often, and I actually got a chance to meet him, and I've been to his shop, and I can consider him an acquaintance. I can't really call him a friend because we really haven't bonded, but he and I talk every now and again on Instagram, and the work he does is just incredible. And he's part of, you guys might remember, some of you listening, Indian Larry was the motorcycle builder who became famous during the biker build-off days of Discovery Channel. And Indian Larry died in a motorcycle accident, in fact. But Paul and him worked hand in hand for many years together. And Paul Cox is a leather worker and a motorcycle builder. And when I think of certain things that I make, I keep in mind the way he does things. And it's just very artful in a machinist kind of way. He's like a machinist and an artist together. And he definitely has always inspired me. He's older than me, not by much, but he's been at it for a really long time. And he makes some pretty incredible stuff if you guys have felt the need to look him up. And so Paul Cox, Indian Larry, Jesse James has always been a big inspiration to me. I know he doesn't have the best reputation, but the things that he does and the tools that he has, things that I aspire to get. And I could keep reading the list off, but Bob, I'll let you take a turn.
All right. I actually was going to go back to what David said about his grandfather, because I am in that exact same spot. My grandfather is he's on the list with Walt Disney, which is impressive. He's still with us, and he's awesome. He's in his late 80s. He's one of those. He's a maker. He's always been a maker, and I learned a ton and was inspired as a child by watching him and being in his shop. And he does everything from late in life. He decided to become a painter, so he does painting. He does these like 100% lifelike carvings of every kind of bird you can imagine and every kind of fish. And he glosses these fish so that they actually look like they're live fish that are wet.
That's cool.
It's unbelievable. But so he has done a ton of stuff with his hands, and that's always been really inspiring. And he's always really motivated me to do that and supported me in the stuff that I've done. But also just from watching him and hearing about him in my hometown. Like growing up, I would talk to people, and when they found out who my grandfather was, they talked to me differently because he has a history of just treating people in such a way that they respect him immediately. And, that's pretty amazing. In fact, I live in Savannah, Georgia now, right? So we moved into this house, got talking to our elderly next door neighbors, found out that they were from Kentucky as well, where I'm from. So we got to talking, and they're like, oh, they're actually from about 25 minutes from where I grew up. So they asked my last name. I said my last name, and they said, oh, Dr. Bob, are you related to Dr. Bob Clagett? I'm like, yeah, that's my grandfather. And they're like,
weird.
Oh, wow, yeah, we know Dr. Bob. And I mean, that blows me away.
Yeah.
That's like an entirely different family from an entirely different place. And so that, and I mean, there's a million stories about stuff he's done and survived plane crashes and
Whoa.
All kinds of stuff. He's just amazing in a lot of ways. And so he's definitely inspired me in tons and tons of different ways. So, David, your turn.
All right. Well, I talked about people who inspire a way of life. And so now I want to talk about a couple that inspires design. And I actually get and borrow ideas from them. And that's Ray and Charles Eames. A few years ago, I watched a documentary on them. I think it's on PBS. I'll link to that in the show notes as well. But I've watched this documentary 3 times, and every time I'm just like, I got to go and make something right now. Their design is just incredible. And they came up, not only their design, but the process how they did things. Like they were one of the first people to have laminated plywood furniture. They would make the forms for these, and they failed, and they learned from their failures and redid it. And they have a lot of awesome chair designs, and they were it was a husband and wife team, and just absolutely beautiful. I've got a couple books with their work in it, and whenever I'm feeling uninspired, I just pick up the book and leaf through and find something. And sometimes I can look at and you guys can probably relate, but I can look at a chair, and that might spark an idea for a box, and it's just looking at something that really inspires you can spark that idea. And it might be way different than what you're looking at, but you just need that little spark to get things going.
Yeah, the details. The details inspire other things for sure.
Yeah. Jimmy, who else?
A big inspiration for me has always been Andy Warhol, and not necessarily because of his work, but because of his experimentation and his ability to sort of just let things happen. And I've obviously heard a lot and read a little bit about what took place in the factory, the quote unquote, the factory where he did his artwork. And the amount of work that he created. I've been to the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, and the body of work, the amount of paintings and he's created and the different types of art he created. And one story that I might have read it in the Sunday Times once. I think that's where I heard about it. Warhol kept a cluttered desk apparently, and every few weeks or once a month, or I forget the timeline, he would just take every single thing on the desk and just put it in a box and just seal the box and date it. And that was a time capsule, so that if he went back to that box, it would be like, apparently in the little snippet I read about this, there's like a piece of cake from like Bobby Kennedy's birthday party, and like just all these like random bits of like time capsule moments in time. And that, I always thought that was very cool. And it's sort of, in my mind, I justify my clutter because of when I read that. I'm like, oh, okay, so I don't feel so bad about having the clutter around me all the time. I wish I could box it and just get rid of it a month at a time, but I keep these objects all around me at any given time. So again, Andy Warhol, for his experimentation and the amount of work that he created, it just seems to be endless.
It's funny you mentioned that last little idea there about, keeping things, because I saw a quote, I think today is maybe Albert Einstein's birthday, or it was recently, but I saw a quote from him, and it was the picture was his desk on the day that he died. There's books everywhere, books all over the shelves, just like stacks of papers, all the stuff. And the quote was supposedly from him. I don't really know, but it was something to the effect of, if a cluttered desk comes from a cluttered mind, then what does an empty desk come from? So something to that effect. Which I thought was really cool, that sometimes our clutter and the fact that we have multiple things going on and the fact that our minds are all over the place is a good thing, because if we didn't do that, then we would be maybe less interesting or something less productive. I don't know. But anyway, that stuck out to me. But so next on my list, this is going to be a little odd. Radiohead. And I am a musician. And so there's the music side of Radiohead, but also the thing that really stuck out I've been a fan of theirs for a very, very long time, but there's something that's always bothered me about them, but at the same time, I think it's pretty amazing. And I'm not sure that it would be obvious to a non-musician, but for me, when I'm writing music, so I've always written rock stuff and like noisy stuff. And so I love these big crescendos. I love like the big hit, and there's like just some driving mass at the end of a song. It's just like big, big, big music. So one of the things that's really frustrating and awesome about Radiohead is that they do that build. They do these really intentional builds, and you can feel this like swell coming. But restraint is the thing that they have that I don't. So they do these massive swells, and then when you expect, or at least when I expect, this thing to just unload on you, this like giant mass, it just disappears. And it's totally opposite of what my nature would be in that particular situation. But from noticing that and then listening to their music with that in mind over and over the years, it's restraint. It's like they're doing that on purpose. They're doing that to evoke a feeling without actually like forcing that feeling by, plowing through with like huge guitars all the time and all this stuff. And so that restraint by them has been pretty evident to me for a long time. And I've tried to keep that in mind when I try to keep it in mind when I write music, but that's pretty hard to do. But I try to keep it in mind when I'm like thinking about a project or thinking about maybe just something I want to attack. Maybe it's, I don't know, a new interest or something. Like, do I want to like fully dump myself? Do I want to swell to this thing and chase this thing so hard and then fully dump myself into it to where there's no turning back? Or would it be more productive and better in the long run to run towards something, but then have the restraint to like, keep it at bay? And I know this is really vague and really general, but I've found that keeping that in mind has actually helped me be more productive in a lot of ways and be able to take on more things than I would otherwise. I don't know if that makes any sense. But and another person that I think uses restraint in a really interesting way is Banksy. and I know he's kind of, you know, pop culture. I mean, he's very popular. A lot of people like Banksy's work, and I like his work as well. But he's been doing it for so long, and he's had the restraint to stay, you know, to stay unknown.
It's amazing. I think
that blows my mind.
Amazing. Yeah,
I mean, because it's, you know, it's our nature to like want recognition for what we do, and he's done so much stuff, and he avoids the recognition, and that's restraint. That's I don't know. That's awesome. That's always stuck out to me. But
very cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So I had a musician as well, but I'm going to hold off on that. maybe the next rounds we'll come back to that. So I'm going to say, and Jimmy touched on this a little bit earlier, but a whole large group of people that inspire me is the YouTube audience who watches my videos, and the YouTube audience who makes videos. Because otherwise I would not want to do what I do if there was no audience, right? And I get so much inspiration from watching these other people who have been doing it for years now, and their technique and the way they interact with people. And also there's a whole bunch of newcomers who are coming up, and it's inspiring to see. You see these young kids come up and make these videos, and they have a different perspective on things, and that's what inspires me. You know, is the audience. That might sound a little bit, might be sucking up to our audience, but I love you people.
No, I concur. I think when I first started researching YouTube, you know, I become friends with a lot of the people that inspired me in the very beginning. And to stay on that subject for a minute, one of my big inspirations in YouTube is Casey Neistat. You guys watch his videos?
I've seen some of them, yeah.
Yeah, he's incredible filmmaker, but he really promotes self-publishing and, you know, taking the power away from, you know, just knocking down that wall to, if you want to communicate, make your own videos. And so take a look at Casey's work. It's pretty incredible. And I actually got a chance to email with him this week. A mutual friend of ours realized that we don't know each other. He's like, "You don't know Casey?" I said, "No, we never met officially, but I've watched everything he's ever done." He says, "I got to introduce you guys through the email." So we met through email, and then a couple of days later, I actually met another mutual friend. I became friends with somebody who also knows him. So I think it's just a matter of time before we get to hang out. And incredible movie maker and incredible mind.
I actually had somebody contact me this week asking if we would have a guest on this show. And their first suggestion was him. And they said, Jimmy knows him, right? And I'm like, I have no idea, but we'll find out. So.
Well, to break the ice with him, I asked him if he would come and speak in my class. And he just had a baby, and he travels all around the world constantly doing lectures on filmmaking and stuff. So I just said, look, I know you have a busy schedule. If you ever found it possible to come speak in my class between now and the end of April. And he did answer me right back. He's like, "I'm just so busy, I can't commit to anything." He said, "But we'll hook up eventually, somehow, some way," which was really cool. So, yeah. And I'll just give you guys one more while I have the stage. I'll lump a group of artists together real quickly. Richard Serra, the guy that does the big giant steel. You guys ever see his work? There's these huge, incredible, giant chunks of steel. And that inspires me because I see from one person comes these, obviously he has a team, he can't do them alone, but these incredibly huge, giant chunks of steel, he turns them into these big fluid shapes. And obviously it's very, very wealthy art to either own or to make. It's incredible. It's overwhelming to me. But when I see that, it's sort of like the analogy I made once about Egyptians and how when you see what they've been able to accomplish, you know, the small problems in front of you are kind of belittled. And it's the same thing when I see what Richard Serra does and the huge amounts of steel he's able to manipulate. Obviously, again, he does it with a foundry and a group of people, I'm sure. But to see your ideas come so solidified in these giant chunks of steel is inspiring to me. And then one more artist, Andy Goldsworthy. Are you guys familiar with Andy Goldsworthy's work?
No.
Oh, you got to look him up. It's incredible. Andy Goldsworthy finds art in nature. He makes visual associations with objects, and he makes, he's very famous for something called the rain shadow. His net result is the photograph of whatever he assembles from nature. He'll find icicles and make them into a big spike ball, or he'll find leaves and arrange them in color sequence from like yellow to red. And he makes these incredible assemblages from art. And like I said, the rain shadow was one of the things where if it just begins to rain, he'll lay down on the ground or have someone lay on the ground, and then they get up quick and he photographs the silhouette of the body on the dry ground.
Awesome.
So it's just his playfulness and his eye to see associations where most people wouldn't see associations. So again, that's inspiring to me.
Cool. I got one more. I have kind of a short list, but I'm sure I can come up with some more. So there's a guy on YouTube who's active now, and you guys may have heard of him. His name's Jack Conte, and he's in a band called Pomplamoose, and they've gotten kind of popular. They've been on YouTube for several years, and the thing that inspires me about him is his like pure energy and his pure desire to create stuff. Like he does a lot of music. He also does like videos, music videos, and just like he has a background in filmmaking. So he just, he's really entrenched in how music and film work together. He's actually the guy that started Patreon, which we use, to help fund this show. So he's, that's not a suck up to him. He's just actually a really awesome guy that I've been following for several years. And actually the day that he launched Patreon, I jumped on it because if he was a part of it, I knew it was going to be good, and it is good. The whole goal there with that, and a lot of other stuff that he does, is to empower people who create stuff to be paid directly by the people who enjoy the stuff that they create. And so he takes that mindset into the way they do their music distribution and the way they fund their videos and their tours and Patreon, like what it's all about. He's got a really good talk from a conference called XOXO, and I'll see if I can find a link to that. But when I've watched it a couple of times, and every time I watch it, by the end of it, I'm like, all right, I'm going to take on the world. I'm going to make some stuff, and I'm going to make a living by myself without, it's really, really motivating. And he's really funny too. So he seems like a really down to earth guy. I've never met him or anything, but so yeah. You guys should check him out. Very cool.
So my next person is an inspiration as a musician, as a businessman, and as he's just a man of many, many talents. And his name is Jack White. And you might know him from the band The White Stripes. Mm-hmm. And what I like about Jack is he was in a very successful band, but that just wasn't good enough for him. And he kept busy. So when the White Stripes weren't touring, he starts another band called the Raconteurs, and then another band on top of that, Dead Weather. And so he just constantly always creating. He just has so much going on at one time. And another thing that I find really inspiring is in this time where independent bands don't make money anymore, or they make less money, or it's harder to get known, he starts a record label, which seems one of the worst times in history to start a record label. But what he's done is he's done things that nobody has ever done before. Like he's releasing records that have hidden tracks in the vinyl, like on the label, or there's a track that's backwards. I know that's been done before, but he's found different ways to do this where he'll have that hidden track at the very edge of the record, what would be song one, or depending on where you drop the needle is where you'll get a different intro to the song. He's got a subscription plan for his record label, and that's just something that you don't see too much anymore coming from a small company, and so just everything he does has this new and innovative feeling, but yet everything is kind of classic, and it's just super inspiring to me. And like we said before, inspiration doesn't have to be a direct line between I'm inspired by woodworkers, but I'm also inspired by other people that influence my woodworking.
Yeah, and that inspiration for a particular thing like woodworking can come from absolutely anywhere. Totally unrelated stuff, which is awesome.
I have a couple of musicians. Since you guys are talking about musicians, I started thinking of the musicians that inspire me when I work, and that's Chet Baker is probably my biggest musical inspiration, even though he's a bit of a tragic figure, but the music he made, he had a natural talent for playing the trumpet, jazz trumpet, West Coast jazz, kind of cool, smooth jazz. And he died in 1988. but from the early 50s to the late 80s, he just constantly created music to feed his heroin habit. There's a pretty tragic movie called Let's Get Lost about his life, and but his music always inspires me. Just the melody, and again the volume of it. I'm always inspired by people that are able to create volumes of stuff. And Hank Williams is another one. Again, another tragic figure, and what he was able to accomplish before the age of 30 is incredible. I mean, most people don't realize that those powerful songs that he sings and writes are all from the mind of a 20-something-year-old. And, when people find that out there, sounds like an old man singing these songs. He died in 1953, I think. And this is a bit of a stretch, but it when I listen to the music of Beethoven, the few powerful songs, I mean, I'm not so deep into his catalog, but there are a few songs like the Ninth Symphony, for instance. I listened to that quite a bit, and I used to use it all the time when I edited. It would always be the soundtrack that I edited to. I don't use music anymore in my edits, but when I used to edit, show pitches and occasionally I would edit show pitches for other people, I would always use Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and it just seemed to fit every situation. There's like different pieces of that work for every situation.
Interesting. There's a Radiolab episode. There's another podcast called Radiolab. If you guys don't know about it, it's amazing. There's an episode about Beethoven. I don't know if you've ever heard this one, but It's about the Fifth Symphony, which is the dun 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 dun, the one that everybody knows. And we've all heard it at a certain pace, which is kind of like that dun 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 dun, the slow thing. But so there's some research that is kind of pointing out to some people that he may have not had it, or he may have wanted it to be a lot faster than what was notated. He was the first composer to have a metronome, which is pretty big in composing, that you can actually like count the time that you want your songs to be, and you can write it down. Before that, it was just like a word, that meant fast or slow. Yeah. And so he was the first one to be able to actually put a number down that, it's this many beats per minute. And so there's some research that shows that the numbers written down on his manuscripts are actually probably way slower than what he meant. And so anyway, in this Radiolab episode, they bring in a quartet, I think, string quartet, and they play the music at the speed that they think he meant for it to be. And it's insanely fast, to the point to where it's almost unplayable. And so when you hear it, it sounds really, really cool, but it also starts this conversation like, why would he do that? Why would he make things so fast that you almost couldn't play it? And there's a really cool perspective there about, all the other composers were writing stuff that they knew an orchestra could play so that it could be really representative of them as a composer, so that somebody could come listening to this and be like, oh, that's a really nice piece of music, and so is the one that wrote it. But the idea is that Beethoven was just kind of a jerk and was like, I want to push you guys as far as I can possibly push you, so that the spectacle of this music event is not necessarily how awesome I am, but it's that you might just have a train wreck, which is really cool. I mean, it sounds like a jerk, but it's also really cool because in a time where people were, doing a certain thing, he was trying to do something entirely different, Anyway, so I would suggest, if you like Beethoven, if you like Radiolab, go check that one out. It's a good episode.
Yeah. I'm going to look it up. I'm going to write it down.
Every once in a while, somebody will say to me that they're not a creative person. And although I think creativity can be easier for some people, I think it's in everybody. And it's one of those things you can learn to be creative. You just have to open yourself up and take in these inspirations and do something with it. And sometimes creativity it's a slow process where you just keep sketching a notepad every single day, and you'll see your sketches get better over time in just a few days, a few weeks time. And you'll also see your ideas get a little bit more creative over time too. So don't believe that you are not creative.
You reminded me a little bit of folk art. It kind of reminds me of folk art. A lot of people don't consider themselves artists, but when you see like some folk art in a museum or something like that, it's art in and of itself, but it isn't considered art when it's being made or in the context of it. So that you just reminded me of that, David.
Yeah, I know I'm always the one that comes back and talks about problem solving, but I think a lot of times when people say that they're not creative, it's because they're they're not being creative in a certain way that they expect that they should be. You know, they may not be like, oh, I can't come up with this image of some beautiful scene out of my head to paint. Well, yeah, me neither, but that doesn't mean I'm not creative, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's why when you go to art school, that's why they give you assignments. That's why they give you a problem to solve. That's why they give you a thing to accomplish, because the creativity is how you accomplish the task. It's not necessarily just generating something beautiful out of nothing. I mean, that is a skill. That is a thing that people do, but that's not the definition of creativity, you know? So I think for people that don't think they're creative, maybe they're not trying to solve the right problems. Maybe they're not.
I think also too that they're trying to come up with something from nothing. Give yourself some limitations. As a photographer, you know, I have a whole bag of lenses, but once in a while, I'll just say, I am taking this one lens. It's not a zoom lens. It's a prime lens. And I'm going to go to the park today. And so when you get rid of all those choices and you're stuck with just these limited options, you find that you come up with creative ways to use what you have. So if you're not coming up with anything, give yourself some walls, set some limits.
That's good advice.
Just one more thought. You guys jogged my memory with my students. Sometimes they are trying to find a creative voice, and I encourage them. Sometimes they do it before I encourage them, and they feel like they've done something wrong. But they'll copy somebody they find online. They'll find something that inspires them. Talk about inspiration. And they'll either copy a pattern or they'll copy a drawing just like it. And I try and tell them that's okay in the very beginning too. If you're looking for inspiration and you want to copy an artist, say for instance, you know, Warhol or Da Vinci or whatever, copy them exactly, and then start to find your own voice within that technique you develop.
I think sometimes if you try to copy them exactly, you can't, and then you kind of develop your own style out of that.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. Like, it's going to mutate, you know, unless you're a really, really good copy artist. You know, it's going to mutate some, and that's a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up for this one. Where can we find more about everybody? David?
You can find my website at drunkenwoodworker.com, and it has links to all my social medias and latest videos and blog. Jimmy?
I always say just Google me. That's the best spot to find me. But you could also look at jimmydiresta.com. And before I forget to say it, I just solidified the date of March 7th at New Orleans Mini Maker Fair. I will be there meeting people.
Oh, very nice.
Right on. And actually, yeah, we're all, just go ahead and announce it, we're all working on, the three of us coming out to Maker Fair in San Mateo, California, the big Maker Fair. Woo-hoo. So we're all going to be there, and we're going to do some podcasting from there. We're going to do some fun stuff. So we don't have it all worked out yet, but we will be there. So if you're coming to that Maker Fair, be sure to find us and say hi. And for me, you can find all my stuff at iliketomakestuff.com. And like David, there's links there to get to everything else. So that's the best way to find us. So I want to thank the people who've supported us on Patreon for this episode. We are super, super grateful for all you guys. I want to thank Nicholas, Jesse, Ben, Jacob, Joseph, Mensch. Got it again. Andreas, Charlie, and Colby. And then those are the top guys, but everybody who has supported us there, we are really, really grateful.
So awesome.
And
thank you.
Patreon is going to enable us to do more of this show eventually, and it's going to enable us to do some more stuff. And so for that, we're really thankful. And if you want to help us do more of the show, check us out at patreon.com/makingit. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all very much.